Morocco has been beefing up security along its border with the Spanish exclave of Ceuta. This comes after rumors spread on the internet of a new wave of attempts to enter the territory. Last month, tens of thousands of migrants descended on Ceuta, overwhelming border guards. 80 died in the attempt. Morocco has asked Spain to return underage migrants who are still in protective custody. Let's get more on this now with Kate Hooper. She's a senior policy analyst with Migration Policy Institute. So, Kate, unaccompanied Moroccan minors have found their way to Spanish territory next door in Ceuta. What status do these minors have in this situation?
So Spain and Morocco have worked well together to return the majority of people who crossed in Ceuta 2 weeks ago. So the latest estimates from the Spanish government were that about 80,000 people made the crossing, and the vast majority have gone back, leaving about 8,000 people left in Ceuta. Of that, we understand around 2,500 to 3,000 are unaccompanied minors, and they are subject to different treatment under Spanish and EU law. So whereas Spain and Morocco have got a readmission agreement that allows them to quickly return adults, there are steps that Spain now has to go through to identify unaccompanied minors, verify who they are, and then figure out if they've got a safe place to return. So the process for dealing with unaccompanied minors is distinct from the regime for adults in this situation.
We heard the Moroccan justice minister saying that his country has moral and legal obligations with respect to those young people who have crossed into Ceuta. What obligations is he talking about?
So Morocco and Spain will end up working closely together to process this caseload. So here we're expecting to see Morocco and Spain working together to identify the children who are in Ceuta and to also make sure that they've got a safe place to return. But it will take time. And so while there's been pressure from the Moroccan side to move quickly to return Moroccan children and reunite them with their families, legally Spain's hands are tied. They do have to go through this process and put them into a system that we already know is fairly overburdened. So there's potential, even with great goodwill on both sides, that this process may take months to play out.
Presumably, the minors in question do not wish to return to Morocco. They didn't return when so many others did. Do we know why? Are they seeking asylum?
It's hard to tell, but certainly we know that there are really challenging circumstances on the ground in Ceuta, which really speak to the incentive to stay. So Ceuta's reception capacity is completely overwhelmed, and we've seen reports of children and adults ending up sleeping rough on the streets and on the beaches, having very little support in the way of food and water initially, and relying on handouts from locals. So it's a really challenging situation for these children to be in 2 weeks later. And I think that speaks to both the circumstances that these children are leaving behind and also the potential draw of what Spain may offer them. So I think, we know that, for example, youth unemployment in Morocco is very high, that there are limited jobs available for young people, whereas, I think that some of these children do look towards Spain as a way to sort of offer greater economic opportunities. We also don't know the role that smugglers have played in facilitating these crossings. It seems like a lot of this was spontaneous, but there may be circumstances where, families have ended up taking on debt to make this journey, which makes the decision to return home without anything at all even more difficult to countenance.
Can you explain to our viewers briefly why the border there between Morocco and Ceuta has become such a flashpoint lately, and what does the situation in Ceuta tell us about Europe's migration challenge?
I think it's been a flashpoint just because of the sheer number of people who've crossed. Overall, irregular migration to Europe is actually down on past years. So we've seen the number of people making these crossings actually fall across Europe. But Ceuta really illustrated how this chaos can play out at the border. 80,000 people crossing in mere days is really unprecedented and really speaks to the challenges that can play out at these borders. And I think from a sort of European policy perspective, it also showed the ongoing limitations of European solidarity. So The EU has passed a new pact on migration and asylum, which is designed to sort of create common European procedures around processing people and screening them at borders and addressing this question of, how do other member states support frontline member states? But the reality is that this test came arguably a little too early to really test out the provisions of the pact. But it also showed that, the fundamental question of solidarity wasn't really resolved, right? So member states still blame Spain for the crisis playing out. There was a lot of finger pointing in the days after the crisis. Spain ended up, relying more on its bilateral relationship with Morocco than on EU support. And I think it illustrated how sort of solidarity around migration remains quite fragile among member states.
And finally, just quickly, if you can, rumors are circulating that suggest people in Morocco wanting to reach Europe may try to enter Ceuta in large numbers again this weekend. What do you make of that?
I think the distinction is that this has been rumored for a couple of weeks, and Spanish and Moroccan authorities are working preemptively to try and tamp down these rumors and to really sort of say that the border is closed. One of the challenges with the events of 2 weeks ago was that this caught Spanish authorities unaware. And so now we've seen investments proactively in border capacity and messaging to say that the border is closed and that this opportunity doesn't exist. And I think that's a key distinction and why we're unlikely to see events repeat themselves.
Kate, thank you so much. That was Kate Hooper, Senior Policy Analyst with the Migration Policy Institute.
Thank you.